I can't say it was like an easy time. That's never an easy decision. This is something I'd spent a lot of my work career, and it was definitely a tough moment. I had hired a ton of people in. There was this great team there, but I think I got to the same point in both roles where if I really zoomed out and I was honest with myself, the job had become something that was no longer what motivated me or what got me really excited and engaged day to day.
Hey, welcome to the Delivering Value podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Kaplan. And in this show, I chat with people who work in and around growth teams to hear about the stories of their career and explore the hardest moments along the way. My guest today is Liz Christo. Liz knows a ton about PLG and SaaS. She's a partner at Stage 2 Capital, which is a B2B investment firm. And before that was a partner at OpenView, where she spent years working with their portfolio on go-to-market plans. Liz joined the pod to really explore the story arc of her career, how she got into tech, the times when she has dealt with burnout, when she knew it was time to step away from roles, how she found new roles that align with her values and her missions, and some of the worst feedback that she received along the way. She shared a ton of good stuff in this episode. Let's go ahead and jump right in. So you rejiggered the schedule for me. Thank you. And you just passed a couple years at Stage 2. So I wanted to ask, how are you feeling about it? A couple years in, you had a good run at OV before this. Now you're at your new gig. And that happened quick.
Yeah, it did. I'm feeling great. So you're right. I'm a couple years in. So I started as an advisor and was doing sort of some part-time consulting work with the portfolio. And I'm now 2.5-ish years into the GP role. And yeah, it's been a journey. I think the last couple years of investing has been a bit of a roller coaster. I feel super lucky for some of the deals that I've done and seen during this time. But if I look back at some of the crazy stuff going on in 2021, even early 2022 to now, it has been a lot, but it has been an incredible network, great experience, great people all around.
I got to ask a 101 type question, but I feel like this is my shot to ask it. What does a partner at a VC firm do? What's a typical week? I'm sure you could do a whole episode on this, but what's the 10,000 foot view on a week in the life?
Oh man, I wish that we could just screen share right now because I have the craziest color-coded calendar because I've been trying to get a better handle on managing my own time, but big chunks. Bunch of my time is spent with the portfolio. So investments that we have already made, either where I'm a board member or board observer. Generally, given the type of firm we are, I'm spending a lot of my time thinking through go-to-market, helping them either make a critical hire, set up a new team, make some sort of org change, lots of different examples there. But that's probably 40 to 50% of my time. And then 1 month of every quarter, a lot of board meetings. And that's the portfolio side. And I'd say another big chunk of time, another 30 to 40% is spent on new deals. And that's everything from sourcing, actively being a BDR, finding companies you're interested in, sourcing the email address of the CEO, doing cold outreach, getting them on the phone. That work is just constantly trying to talk to and get introduced to new companies. And then following those through the funnel. So figuring out when's the next time I'm going to chat with that CEO, what is the update I'm looking to get? And if you get excited about the company, actually starting to diligence and work towards a deal. And then the last piece is sort of a chunk of internal time, maybe 10 to 20% that's more oriented to internal firm operations, writing content, connecting with our LPs, our investors. Those are my big buckets, and we can go deeper on any of those. But I would say the really fun stuff comes from working with portfolio companies and chatting with founders.
It's super dope. And so you're sourcing your own deals, you're hunting for them, you're finding them, you're nurturing them. And then after they become part of the portfolio, you're helping them. It's great. I'm curious to know how you got here. Can we go back in time a little bit? Can you tell us where you're from and what you were like growing up?
Oh man, I'm from Simsboring, Connecticut. That was always the phrase in high school.
Oh man, that's tough.
I know,
that's
terrible.
Tough.
Grew up in a small town in Connecticut. I ended up going to college at Middlebury, Vermont. And for me, I really did not have any idea what I wanted to do when I graduated. And I graduated early from college, so 3 years instead of 4, and came out in this 2008 time when things were a little rocky and interesting.
Also, when I graduated, kind of the worst time to graduate.
It worked out for me. So I thought that I was going to go do the banking thing because it was basically when you graduated from Middlebury, everybody either went to consulting or banking and everyone moved to New York. And I went down for like, I don't know, the equivalent of like accepted student stay at this job at a bank and was like, oh man, I don't think investment banking is for me. And I do not want to live in the city. And I totally like rethought what I was doing. And I ended up finding this tiny little company, Open Air, that had posted a job on our college job board. And I ended up talking to the hiring manager on a Saturday morning and driving down to interview with them in their office that Monday or Tuesday. It was like a couple days later, which is just crazy. So I took this job at a startup, knowing nothing about tech or startups, and was just like, I liked the people, like it's a better vibe, and we'll figure it out from here. Boston seems great. And it was just like a wild journey. So I joined the startup. It ended up getting acquired by NetSuite. And so that was my path into a public company. And man, I feel like I've spent a lot of time now telling people like I fell into tech, but man, I feel like so lucky that I did that.
And what was your major in college?
Economics. I minored in psychology. I don't know that it has anything to do with it now. It's like a liberal arts degree.
Well, it's so funny, right? Because you come out of high school, who the fuck knows what they're going to do when they're in high school? And then you get to college and your brain is still barely fully formed, but like has no idea what it might be good at or might enjoy doing. So you pick a major and then you just try to keep moving it forward. And then you get out of school and then you're like, well, now what?
Yeah, my first job was doing customer support. And it was customer support for a software product, pretty deeply technical project management software, enterprise clients. And it was mostly individuals calling up or sending emails in being like, I discovered this bug, and, spending a couple hours problem solving, figuring out what it is and closing the loop with engineering. It was honestly like really fun, taught great phone skills, very, I don't know, actually very formative as I think about where my career went from there. But that for me, like when I talk about making my way into sales, I spent so much time on the phone with customers. Like you learned a lot during that time.
That's cool. And how long were you there?
Well, Open Air got acquired very promptly, but I was with NetSuite or like the broader organization for 8.5 years total.
Which is a pretty long run for your first gig.
Yeah. I mean, it's crazy. I think when we got acquired, I sat there thinking like, oh, I didn't want to work for a big company. And I think it was like 400 people at the time, which to me was just like enormous because I had joined a 40-person organization. And I was sat there thinking like, all right, I got to find another job. And I don't know, I probably half looked if I'm being honest, but I had such a journey in NetSuite and I'm so lucky that I stayed and like all the things I got to work on. But it is crazy looking back that like, man, that could have just been like a totally different story post-acquisition. They could have laid us all off.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that definitely could have happened. If we could go back in time, so those first couple of years, so you're working in customer support, customer success, that type of stuff. If we were to have talked to one of your colleagues or coworkers from back then, how would they describe you?
Great at the USA Today crossword. I laugh right now, but I feel like every point in your career, you think you're busy. And then you get a little more responsibility and a little more to do. And you just constantly increase your capacity for work and your ability to prioritize. But I look back at my customer support days and I'm like, my friend and I used to sit at a desk and do a crossword together at work, which is just like blows my mind now. But kidding aside, I think if I thematically zoom out and just think about my career, I've always been somebody who's just like all in on whatever I'm doing. And I think if you look back at that time, all of my peers and colleagues would have said exactly that. If there is something to go figure out or learn, like she's going to do it. And doesn't matter how long it takes, like just all in.
I love that. And as a side note, could you finish the crossword every day?
Yeah.
Because the crosswords are fucking tough.
It got harder during the week. So like I was always good until Thursday. And then I would have to like see how far I could get. Do you cheat? Do one of the clues? And you really try not to, but yeah, usually.
Because I have a crossword app that I use today and it tells me if it's easy, medium, or hard. And I didn't know that there was levels that were labeled like that. And so I can usually get the easy ones and the medium ones, maybe like 35%, and the hard ones, maybe 10% if I'm rounding up.
It's also funny, like you got to get good at doing crossword clues. Like it's a skill in and of itself. It's not the same as trivia. It's like you learn how they write the clues. And so if you do like the New York Times ones, it's different than other ones.
And there's certain words that are always in crosswords that have a lot of vowels. What is it? The fencing sword EP is always in the crossword.
Yep. Because it's like an easy one to fit. That's so funny.
Totally. All right. So you're working there in the early days. You're all in. I'm curious to know. So obviously this show is a little bit more about some of the speed bumps and challenges and mistakes and learnings along the way. What's a mistake or a challenge that you encountered earlier on in your career that you wish you could undo if you could go back in time?
We're going to fast forward a little bit from customer support days. I ended up taking on an initiative at NetSuite to start our top of funnel BDR lead gen organization.
So contextualize it for us. So you're working in customer success, and then kind of where are you fitting into the org? How much later is this?
Yeah, a couple speed bumps along the way. So I first went to join sales operations. And so I worked on the sales ops team for the broader public company NetSuite and managed a lot of our acquired products, so OpenAir being one of those. And so I did everything from deal desk and processing orders and closing the month to SKU management, territory management, insert random rev ops, sales ops task here. And I feel like I give this advice to people all the time. Don't just promote an employee into sales ops. If you take a 23-year-old BDR and tell them to run your data, you're going to get a lot of mistakes back. Learned fast, but there were some moments. I moved from that into account management, and I ran a post-sale team, renewing and selling into the install base. And then that was what came directly before building the top of funnel team. And what happened there was we had built this account management team that was a bunch of people who were not sellers. And I had hired a number of people who came from deep domain expertise or subject matter expertise, and then taught them the sales motion for the company. And that sort of became the hey, how do we do that repeatably? Meaning, all right, if I look at the number for next year, and this was in 2011, we were looking forward and saying, hey, we need to figure out how to maintain this growth. We had historically always been an inbound lead gen organization, and we needed to figure out how to create more demand for our sellers, and more importantly, how to get more ERP sellers in seat. Super complex financial product sold to CFOs across every vertical. And so the mantra really became how do you figure out how to grow the next AE? And what we ended up doing was, or I guess when they approached me about it originally, it was trying to figure out how to replicate this thing we had done in account management by training people up who were not sellers, but doing that very repeatedly and at scale for recent college grads. And so the program was really started as this idea of don't screw up our inbound lead gen, and figure out how to grow sellers. If you happen to also produce outbound leads, that'd be great along the way. So then we were running a BDR org, and year 1, we had 20 people. Year 2, we had 50 people. Year 3, I think it was 120. It grew really fast. Then we were just constantly hiring new classes and new cities and opening new spots. And we got this thing humming in North America over the first 18 months. And I was fighting hard to own international. And we were starting to open offices and build a much bigger presence. And if we're going to have BDRs in the US, then we're going to have BDRs in Canada, then we're going to have them in the UK, and we're going to have them in Sydney and Singapore and Japan. And I fought so hard to run that broader entire org. And I think part of that was this idea of just constantly looking for more responsibility and learning the next thing. But I look back at that time now, and I totally burned out. Over the course of those 4 years, I was up at 4 or 5 a.m. to start doing calls with the UK. I was up until midnight doing calls with Asia. And I did that on repeat for years. And then was also traveling to each of these places at least once a quarter. And the reality is nobody was paying me more or giving me kudos for doing it. I was just responsible for it now. And so if I look back at that time, I think a mistake is a hard word. There's a lot that I learned during that period, but man, I would do it different if I could do it again.
This episode is presented by AppQues. If you work in product-led growth, you know how important activating and engaging new accounts is. Turning new accounts into active users is critical to your success in a PLG environment, and typically why activated accounts is a North Star metric for growth teams. It's why my team spent years focused on improving our new user onboarding experience during my time at Wistia and at Postscript, and that's why I'm so excited that AppQues is sponsoring the show. They're just as passionate about helping product-led companies fix their onboarding and their retention as I am. They're the leading product onboarding and adoption platform for web and mobile apps, and they've helped over 1,500 SaaS orgs create exceptional onboarding experiences that convert new users into power users and brand advocates. So if you're looking for help activating more new accounts, head to appcues.com/value. They have a free new user onboarding audit, which is done by Ramli John. He literally wrote the book on new user onboarding, and he's a close personal friend of mine. For help, head to appcues.com/value. So just to rewind, because I want to make sure I wrap my head around it. Where do you fit into the overall org? So I get what the teams were focused on. Were you leading all the teams?
Yes. Sorry. So I was the head of global business development.
At a pretty young age, right? This is still your mid-20s, 2011?
Yeah. I started that team when I was 24, 25.
That's insane.
Yeah. And it was interesting. I moved around over time, but think of it as a peer organization to the direct sales team. So we had VPs and heads of verticals for selling direct. And then my org was feeding them leads and also people. So the idea was hiring to fill the need for our future SMB and mid-market reps. And then we were also responsible for outbound and inbound lead gen.
And so you're in your mid-20s. You've got an org that has over 100 people in it?
Yeah, we were probably about 170 ICs plus a team of 30-ish in management, directors, enablement, recruiting, all of the above.
And it's international. And so you're working early, you're working late. Probably you're not taking care of yourself because work is the number one thing at that stage of your life.
Exactly. You hit the nail on the head.
Did anything bad happen or did you just not feel good? Like, what does burning out mean to you? How do you, like, as you reflect on it, why do you use those words?
Nothing bad happened, actually. But I think you're right. I wasn't healthy. I wasn't taking care of myself and I felt tired. I don't think that I was like doing my best work. I was doing as much as I could in any given day to keep the train on the rails. There wasn't like some incident or moment, but I do remember waking up one day late 2015 and I had been on the road just constantly that year and just reflecting on like, I haven't slept in my own bed in like weeks. I haven't actually been on the phone with a customer in probably 9 months. I'm no longer actually coaching any frontline people. Like I'm layers removed and like, this wasn't actually like a job I wanted. Like I liked the idea of it more than the actual work. And I think at that point, I started reflecting on what are the parts of my job that get me really excited. And ironically, it was like, it sounds weird. I want to like do real work again. And what I meant by that is I wanted to get hands-on with something. And that meant not being a VP at a public company for me. I wanted to be more of an individual contributor and digging in and getting to do the things that got me really excited early in that journey.
I feel like this is a really common story when I chat with folks who are high performers in that they usually get promoted, they get into a leadership position, they're doing more coaching than running the plays themselves, and they miss the work. But it's like a pattern that you almost can't stop. Like, why are people like us? You are on another level, but I'm going to include myself in there. Why are people like us so infatuated by this influence thing? Why is that so important? Why are we hungry for that?
Man, I wish I had that answer. I wish I could give that advice to someone too, but it's ingrained. Like you feel like you have to climb this corporate ladder and you have to get the next promotion and you have to fight for more responsibility. And it's funny, I spend a lot of time now coaching and working with really early stage companies. And I think one of the things I realize and watch there is this natural specialization that happens. And so you have, employee number 4 or 5, who's this jack of all trades, great at everything, gets things off the ground, and then like you hire other people in. And for the vast majority of people, it's really hard to let go or to have things taken away from you. And I feel like I find myself in this coaching moment of calling somebody and being like, hey, your unique value add is the fact that you can get things off the ground. Like you have the influence. You can go 0 to 60 and hire someone in. Like your superpower is not run this thing at 100 or whatever the relative scale is. But more importantly, it's definitely not doing that for 3 things at once. And we're going to pay you the same. You're going to be less stressed. And like the CEO thinks this is the most valuable skill you can bring. Lean into that. Don't try to just hoard the toys and keep them over here. So I don't know. I guess I can give the advice, but I had a really hard time breaking the cycle for myself. It took a lot of time.
I feel like for me, I always get stuck where if somebody takes something away, the story in my head that I'm telling myself is, well, I wasn't doing a good job, or I'm not deserving of it, or this is a punishment. It's really hard to break that cycle. Our fucking brains.
Yeah, I'm so with you on that. And it's really funny at each step in my career, and now at stage 2, I am an individual contributor. No one works for me. I work with my portfolio companies, and it is like definitely the happiest I've been, but it took me a long time to make that journey to here.
So tell me about actually, I want to ask, was this the only low point? So you talked about a low point being, gosh, I just took on way too much. I got spread a little too thin. I was working too hard. I was unhappy. I was burnt out. Is this your only low point?
God, wouldn't that be nice? It was the only one. No, but I'll share one more. I think I had a really weird transition from OpenView to stage 2. And I guess I'll talk a little bit about I don't want to call it burnout. I think there was something very different there. When I left OpenView, it was end of 2020. We told the team start of 2021.
And how long were you at OpenView? Sorry to interrupt you real quick.
No worries. 6 years, a little bit more.
Because that's when I met you, right? So you were at OpenView. You and I met. I was working at Wistia. You were looking to bring on someone to do growth stuff in the portfolio. We met. We've kept in touch. Okay, so keep going. So you're at OpenView.
So at OpenView, my job shifted over time. So I went there to build a post-investment consulting group, which a lot of people call platform or ecosystem or like consulting. But the idea was like project-based work, working with the portfolio companies, and a lot of like amazing people on that team. As I was there longer, I joined the partnership and the investment committee and started shifting my time to the investing side. All of that was great. When COVID hit, there was definitely like this moment of we went from an in-person every day to totally remote culture. And I think it just was this catalyst to get me thinking about, again, like, what do I really find important, right? And I had gone to OpenView originally to be an IC again and to get to work with portfolio companies. And fast forward 6 years, that was not the role I was doing. And I think it took a lot of self-reflection again to figure out, hey, what are the parts of your job you really like and what does that look like? Obviously, like GP at the firm, it was important to leave on the right note and make sure everybody is good with that transition, which led to 9 months of me sitting there going, what do I want to do next? And so when I departed OpenView, I wanted to be really conscious not to dive into the next thing. And so I think probably one of these like type A traits, I told myself that. And then the first thing I did was I emailed 30 people in my network and was like, I'm thinking, I'm looking, and I set up a ton of conversations. And I think I was doing like probably like 20 hours of conversations a week. It was probably like late February. And my husband was just like, what are you doing? You said you were going to take a break and you are sitting on like job offers already. And you say you don't want to go back yet. So take a beat. I really felt lost. Like that was a moment of, I don't know what I want to do next. I couldn't decide if I wanted to go back into an operating role. I couldn't tell if I wanted to go to a bigger company, a smaller company. It took a ton of self-reflection and work to try to figure out what was important to me. And through those conversations, I ended up trying to really distill down like what were the values of the organization and what was the culture that I would feel really aligned with. And I tried to focus on that more so than the role. So I'd started doing some consulting. I was spending a bunch of time with 5 or 6 companies in a fractional capacity. And then I got naturally connected to Stage 2. And I invested as an LP first and started spending more time with the team. And there was just sort of this like natural pull. And I kept checking what they were doing against this culture and values list I had built. And it just kept clicking. And so I don't know, I think there was a valley there of a lot of self-doubt. And are you really ready to make a decision of what comes next? And then just finding the right thing came to be.
Did you have goals to become a partner at OpenView? Was that a career goal of yours after you got in there? Because I was curious if you had set a goal, achieved it, and then felt lost, and that's maybe part of the exit, or if there was a different reason.
No, that was actually really not my goal. I hadn't even really explored or hadn't thought I wanted to explore the investing side. I was super lucky. There was an incredible set of partners there. And they came to me with that I joined in 2017, the partnership. So it was like a year after I joined, and they were thinking through like, hey, what's the next version of this partnership look like? And how are we building the firm? And yeah, it was put on the table and it made sense for me at the time. But yeah, no, I wish that I could tell you that I had written this career map that I went and made every stop along the way. But no, that was not the goal at that point.
Do you think it made it easier to walk away because it wasn't one of your goals?
I don't know. I can't say it was like an easy time. That's never an easy decision. This is something I had spent a lot of my work career. I mean, you highlighted this. I spent 8.5 years, my first job, 6.5 or so in my second. Like I'm definitely a loyal and committed person. And it was definitely a tough moment. I had hired a ton of people in. There was this great team there, but I think I got to the same point in both roles where if I really zoomed out and I was honest with myself, the job had become something that was no longer what motivated me or what got me really excited and engaged day to day. So I don't know that it would have been, maybe it was easier for that reason, but mostly I guess like I just more reflect on how do you make sure you're being true to what makes you happy? And I probably, if I'm being honest, should have done something about that a year earlier and wasn't having those reflective conversations with myself.
I have the same feeling about other jobs that I've had where I stayed too long, and I think it's hard to know the right time. So you take some time off and you did something that I think is really fascinating. I'm curious if you can share more about you said you put together a list of cultural things that were important and personal values. Can you elaborate a little bit more?
Yeah, I'll share two because they're the ones that, like, when I boil everything else down to, like, were really important for me culturally. I really wanted to work in an environment that was like highly accountable. And I think one of the things I realized about a hierarchy versus a partnership and just like comparing my two long-term work experiences, what mattered to me. If someone says they're going to do a thing, follow through is just so important to me personally, but then also to build like trust in an organization. And I think, or at least I've witnessed in a lot of companies that people give lip service to that, but then there aren't actually any like ramifications or conversations or anything when somebody doesn't. And it's this sort of like underlying lack of trust that breeds. So like accountability first. And then second was autonomy. And autonomy to me, again, coming at this from the angle of I wanted to be in more of an individual contributor role. I wanted to be hands-on. I wanted to be like responsible for something and working. I like the idea of being part of a team. And this probably stems from like playing a lot of competitive sports. But I like was a swimmer and a tennis player. Like I like being part of a team, but I just want to like control my own destiny and run. And so if we as a group are like aligned and we know what we're going, I want some room to do things along the way. And so I guess, all right, it came down to three A's. That was actually like really poignant there: alignment, autonomy, and accountability. And those are the three things that I just kept holding jobs up to and trying to think about, does this fit what I want? And I think all of that also just meant not a lot of internal politics and BS and just realizing like, how do you get the red tape out of the way?
And how did you come up with those three words? Like, were there any exercises or people that you leaned on? And I'm going to contextualize this. The reason why I'm asking is because as a coach and as a mentor, every week I chat with folks who are in roles where they're questioning if they're in the right place. Sometimes they've outgrown the company. Sometimes they might feel like the company's outgrown them, but they're nervous to leave and they're not sure what good would look like for their next gig. And so I'm curious if there was anything that led you to those answers.
It's great. People gave me a couple of different tasks, and I feel like it's some combination of all of them. And there was a lot of advice flying at me, right? So the first one was like to look at your calendar and to understand what are the parts of your current job that just get you jazzed. If you're to look at that week, what are the things that you lean into, get excited about, and then like try to articulate why, and then how much of your time is actually spent doing them. And that to me was like that real realization of, wow, like you aren't doing the things that give you energy. So that was one. The second one was, can you point at someone else's job you want? Doesn't matter what it is. It can be like zookeeper, right? What is something that you look at and you're like, I want to do that all day? And again, can you explain why? And then can you actually picture yourself in that role? If you can't, go talk to some of those people who look like they have a job you want and understand what they do all day, because mostly people's jobs look better from the outside than they are when you're doing them, and make sure you understand it. And then the last thing was writing down like when you've worked in like for the best boss of your life in the best teams. When you think of teams generally, it could be sports teams. It doesn't need to be like your work team. What are the qualities of those environments that made you most successful? And so those three things together, I feel like boiled down to like what I was looking for. But this happened over months. This was not like I sat down and decided this.
Of course. Were you working with a coach? Are there just mentors in your life? Did you just do a lot of journaling? Like, how did you get there?
Yeah, I talked to a lot of people. I wasn't working with a coach specifically during that. I had worked with a coach at OpenView, an executive coach who's awesome, Shannon Cassidy. She was great. I've had plenty of like mentors and friends weigh in during that process. But I think honestly, it was probably a lot more like a couple of my best friends and my husband having to just hear about it constantly for a long time. The dinner table conversation.
Yeah. You also said something before that I thought was really interesting. You talked about you said, I want to have room to run. And I imagine that's probably one of your superpowers, right? Because you talked about the run that you had at your first gig. You talked about how that's important to you as a superpower. Has it ever turned into your kryptonite also? Has that ever gotten you into trouble?
Yeah, it definitely has. So we did this exercises back in NetSuite days. And I had an incredible team of managers working for me. But like my direct reports, and they had rolled out this thing from like HR or L&D. And it was this like exercise where they brought in an external coach and they took you through like a 2-day offsite. And it was all about leadership development. And it started by doing one of those like DISC profile personality tests. And then there was just a series of exercises that they walked you through. And the first exercise we did was, there's a room of 8 people total. And so there's a whiteboard at the front, and the person who's having this feedback given to them is holding a marker at the front of the room. And it's a 2-minute feedback session, and everybody in the room just shouts out adjectives, and you classify them as a pro and con on the board. So as people are yelling adjectives, you, the individual who they're being said about, have to write them all down.
And as you're like trying not to react or be excited or sad or whatever.
Right. And so I went first because everybody worked for me and that felt like the appropriate thing to do. So like, the first 30 seconds is just like all these awesome things, right? Liz is high energy and she's exciting and she gives me great feedback. Like we go through this whole thing. And the coach in the room is like, it has to be an equal number of positive and negative ones. And now maybe we're like a minute and 15 seconds into this 2 minutes. So the next 40 seconds is just every single thing that is like bad about working for you that you have to write down in order. And it was the most, I don't even know, harrowing, like a jaw-dropping, like shocking moment to hear all these things from people I like really respected. I thought we had a very high functioning team. And then obviously we spent the next hour and a half unpacking all this together. But the thing that came out that I think was really like eye-opening for me is I had this like incredibly smart, incredibly hardworking team. And they were all like, you move too fast. And when you make a decision, you like need to take us along for the ride. And we're worried that like we miss out on certain pieces of feedback because you just move faster than other people. And so we spent a bunch of time figuring out how to like combat that in our own work environment. But I will like never forget that exercise. I also will never force someone to do that. But it was actually really great and completely changed how we worked as a team. And I thought made us actually much stronger.
Love that. So what's going through your mind in that moment though? If we could just go back there. So you're in front of the whiteboard, you got your pen out, you've been smiling in the first minute, the first 90 seconds.
Oh my God, they're all going to quit. Why would you want to work for this woman?
Right. As you're processing it. Yeah.
They are all about to walk out the door. They hate me. How did I get here? No, it was terrifying. I mean, look, at the end of the day, being able to act on the feedback, I think was what was critical. But man, sitting there and thinking, man, you all have worked for me for years and no one has ever said this. Like, how did we, again, like I honestly literally was texting with one of these guys this morning who I have not seen in 2 years right now. We catch up regularly still, but had never said it to me. And so clearly we had not created an environment where that kind of feedback was normalized. I think probably like I would have heard it if it had been said. I just don't think that we gave that kind of feedback to each other. We just ran fast and got stuff done. And yeah, it was time to take a moment to reflect.
If you had a chance to go back in time and do it over, how do you get that kind of feedback from your team without having the coach and without being in front of the whiteboard? What's the takeaway for folks listening to this being like, gosh, I wonder what my team thinks about me? How do I get at that?
It's funny. I think normalizing asking for feedback is the way to start there. And actually, my partner at work, because I know we talked about this earlier, I have a partner in life and then my partner at my venture capital firm. Dan Heck, I think, actually does a really incredible job of this. But he will regularly, like when we wrap up a deal, ask for feedback on what could he have done better? What could he have done to support me better in a deal? He goes to our CEOs and asks the same question. We made these promises to you when we were investing. What feedback do you have for us? Are we delivering on that? And it's interesting, like the first couple of times you do it, I don't think people are as open. But if you keep asking and you make it just a part of your common practice, whether that's once a month, once a quarter, whatever, it doesn't have to be on a cadence, but you just got to do it often enough that people realize like you actually care about getting better. And then more importantly, when they do give you feedback, you have to do something with it. You can't just ignore it. That to me is like the easiest way to make that happen. And you also have to give it. It's a two-way street. And I think that I use this word normalize, but I do think that direct feedback, many people just feel is very caustic and accosting and hard to hear. And truly, if you're coming at it from a place of, we all just want to get better, or like, we want to do better, it's a great thing. Like it's a gift.
I think about that almost as a cultural norm. It's like culturally, are we trying to build each other up and to get better together? If so, then we need to constantly be chatting about stuff. I'm happy to lead with vulnerability if that makes it easier. As a leader, I'm happy to be the first person in front of the room, just like what you shared. But to me, that comes down to, I think about that as company culture, because the way that you deliver the feedback is totally different if you truly are trying to build people up. And so I like that. Just make it part of how you operate.
And it's funny because I think depending on the size of the company, that can be a tone from the top that's set as like the entire company. That could be a team dynamic. There's lots of different ways that can actually be set without it being just the CEO creating that from the get-go.
I feel like at every company I've been at, At some point, they realize people aren't communicating to each other outside of the 360 reviews. And typically the 360 reviews were being like kind of nice and maybe putting a one-liner in there on the thing that probably should be elaborated on a little bit more.
No one believes they're actually anonymous.
No, they're not anonymous. We all know who it's from. So we might as well just own it and help people. But at every company I've been at some point we read Radical Candor. And without really talking about how to give great feedback, we just read the book and maybe there's a book club. And then afterwards, I feel like everybody overcompensate and it's kind of just jerks to each other for a little bit. And then somewhere you land in the middle later. And so if I ever go back in-house, I need a company that has that just as part of the deal. I can take it, give it to me every day, but don't let it build up and then roll me down a mountain at the end of the year type of thing. I just want it in the moment all the time.
Totally. I don't know if you've noticed this, but working remote, I've just had this observation of one other thing that has changed, which I think in person, people are more human and they like assume people have the best of intentions. And when everyone's remote, there's this very weird dynamic where like everyone kind of thinks the thing they're working on is the most important thing and like other people aren't working as hard. And then that leads to this interesting dynamic of, well, you screwed that up. And instead of thinking like, oh, did I not give enough information for that person to respond? Or like, I can't see their facial expression, so I don't know they're confused. Or like, I don't know, you put a one-liner in Slack and instead of picking up the phone and calling and explaining it, you just seem angry. So I don't know, there's this like remote thing that is also creating a very odd cultural dynamic, even if you want to be like open and helpful and collaborative and give constructive feedback. I don't know, I'm seeing it be a little harder.
I feel like some of the hardest conversations I had in the office were informal. It's like I saw somebody in the kitchen and like I kind of didn't want to see him in the kitchen because I was upset with him because we just had this meeting and like the meeting was tense. And now here we are getting coffee and it's like, fuck it, I got to say something. And then it spurs this really good back and forth. And then really that brings you closer in the long run. And that doesn't happen remote. So you can build up a little bit of, my words, not yours, but animosity if you're not careful.
Yeah, no, I think that's super real. How do you combat that? As you're coaching folks and thinking about that, what do you advise them to do?
Well, I think one, if there's a situation like that, I think you address it immediately. I usually advise folks to there's a Brene Brown line that I really like. The story that I'm telling myself in my head is, and then you can lead with the thing that's bothering you, but share it from a place of, hey, I'm probably wrong, but the story in my head is you did this thing because you don't think what I'm doing is important and you don't like the way that I did it and I'm annoying you by asking about it and I'm probably wrong, but that's just what's going on in my head and you don't like me because of blah, 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 blah. And then that just starts bringing you together. So I think you can lead with vulnerability in that way. And then I like to make it part of the operating system. So constantly asking for what things should I be working on? And if I'm managing up, I want to make that part of my one-on-one. Here's the opportunity to work on this skill today. Or if I'm managing someone on my team, I also want them to be reflecting on that for, in our one-on-ones. So like that's a question I'm going to be asking them. Like if they're working on simplifying their work because they overcomplicate things, I might say, write down 3 opportunities that you had this week to simplify. So I just try to build it into the system so that it's not a guessing thing and it doesn't build up over time. So that works for me.
I agree. I think the one thing I would add is just picking up the phone. I agree with everything you said, but just it's okay for things not to be formal in a scheduled Zoom. And it's great for things to get off typing. What are just these normal connections you can make that are normalizing the informal again? Just pick up the phone and call. And like, it's okay for it to be a 2-minute conversation because if you book it for 30 tomorrow, you're both going to be thinking about it until then.
Is there a time that in your mind you're picturing this moment where you're just like, fuck it, I'm just going to call him right now and it was a huge win?
I mean, a lot. It's not like I have one in mind. I just, whenever I feel like something is going kind of weirdly sideways or I'm not getting the response I'm expecting, it is actually in my head doing what you just described, that Brene Brown line, but of just, I need to figure out what's going on the other end. And I'm not going to do that via Slack right now.
Do you ever struggle with self-doubt? Switching gears a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. Of course. I mean, definitely a lot in that low point we described earlier of in between roles and just figuring out what comes next. But I think probably the time in my career where I felt it the most was making the jump from operating to advising when I joined OpenView. And I was in a firm that had a whole bunch of portfolio companies and someone else had made the investment decisions. And I was like thrust upon these CEOs as like, this person's going to help you like with your go-to-market. And I wanted to be helpful, right? Like I only wanted this to work. And I think energy and excitement about this led to making just probably way too many recommendations. And I think one of the things I was struggling with in those first few months was like, people aren't getting stuff done. And I was coming off a role where if we decided something, like we could just implement it that day or do it the next day. I could swipe a credit card and buy a piece of software. There was just no like I had decision-making power and the ability to go do. And that's very different when you're having to influence from the outside. And I kept feeling these moments of like, we would get on the phone, we would all agree to something. We need to set up a dashboard that shows us these 4 things. And then you'd get on the phone next week and no one built the dashboard. Okay, so did you guys rethink the strategy? And we'd have this whole conversation. It's like, no, we still need to do that. Okay, cool. Who's going to do it? Oh, awesome. Josh is going to do it. Great. Josh, do you want to send that to me tomorrow? Well, let's check in on our call next week. And I'm like, all right. And then I was getting people's logins and just doing stuff. So anyway, I share all that because I was sitting down with one of the other partners and I just remember it was probably 6 months in going, I don't feel like I'm having impact and I don't know how to help. And his response I thought was just actually really helpful at the time, which was, with any company you're talking to, can you think of one thing that they could do better? And I was like, yeah. He goes, well, then share that. Don't tell them 10 things. Don't try to tackle too much. Just pick one impactful thing and work on it until it's done. And it did make me just reframe how I was working. And I try to use that a lot more now. Hey, there's a lot of things that every company should do better, but most of them aren't really going to move the needle. And so if the most important thing is going to be we need to stand up a BDR team or hire an independent board member, don't keep asking about the marketing hire. Do the thing that is front and center and going to make the most impact. So I try to do that more now, but I do remember those moments of just feeling, oh man, I don't know how I see a path through this.
So you almost had to recategorize in your brain what your value was. You thought your value was, hey, I need to solve all of the things. And the feedback that you got was, actually, it's really helpful even just to solve one of these things. Help us figure out what that is, and then we can move forward.
Yeah. And actually, I think even a step further than that, I thought my job was to do it. And more and more, I realized my job is to identify and create accountability.
And did it take someone pulling you aside to figure that out, or was that just through a reflection?
No, it definitely did. I mean, I don't think it was as simple as, hey, one conversation, but I think it was a process of me getting very frustrated and trying to figure out how to do this and asking others for feedback. And then one partner just breaking this down to get over it. You're here. No one thinks you're doing a bad job. Just here's some ideas to help. And it was a very crystallizing moment of oh, okay. Yeah, that sounds great.
Right. And my peers or my boss or whomever think I'm doing a good job. It's me that thinks I'm not doing a good job. So I got to get out of my own way and just get back to work.
And I had created this just false measuring stick. No one else gave me that measuring stick or said, hey, this is how you're being judged. It was very clearly something I had manifested in my own head and was measuring myself against daily. And so I think also probably creating some clarity on those expectations is probably something I should have done sooner and gut checked that with others.
I love that. Clarify and verify. Those words are seared into my brain from working with a coach, because I think that's the root cause of a lot of it. I chat with folks all day, every day about, hey, I'm in this role and I'm not sure if I'm doing a good job or if I'm worthy of even being here. And a lot of it comes down to, what does success look like in your role? And are you and your boss on the same page in terms of that? And a lot of times they're not, or they don't even know to ask. And it sounds pretty similar to what you described here.
I like that. Clarify and verify.
Have there been certain people or moments that have been big players in your career trajectory?
Oh, for sure. Lots of people. When I look back, the person who first hired me, Brian Martin, and the first sales leader I worked for, Jeff Honeycomb, and the GM of that team, Ed Marshall, and one of the sales leaders I worked for, Paul Offerman. I was so lucky to have this group of people around me who believed me, supported me, promoted me, were always there, with the late night question and those moments of just doubt, friction, whatever it was. And we're big helpers along the way. And it's amazing now to look back and think about these are a group of people I still stay in touch with who have just been amazing to me. And there's many more as I go through my career. But as I think about those early days, there's just a few folks that were part of that sort of first pivotal step, joining a tech and software company and making some leaps into finding a path where I could get really excited about what I was working on.
And if you could go back in time, what's a skill that you wish you had prioritized earlier in your journey, and why?
It's funny you use the word prioritization, but priority, it's what comes to mind for me. I think the way that I describe it now is that axis of urgent and important. And I think it's really easy to let the things that are urgent overwhelm the things that are important. And I did not do a great job of managing that earlier in my career. And I think that's a skill I continue to work on and try to get better at. But it also is like how I organize my week, my day, how I plan. I don't know. I don't think we do a good job of teaching people how to do that. And it took a lot of iteration to find ways to make that really work for me. But that axis and like trying to think about when I pick up a task, like where does it sit on that has been like really helpful to me. And then the last thing I'll say is not starting my day with email. And I know people like talk about that, but this idea of like email is other people's to-do list. Oh my God. If you just sit down and start working your inbox, I don't know, I probably have 6 months of work if I just got no new stuff today, right? And none of it, that sounds terrible, not that none of it matters, but like there's a lot of time you could spend just like boiling the ocean on small tasks. So prioritization is definitely the thing that comes to mind for me.
Do you block off email time, just as a side note? Is that a time on your calendar? How much time a day?
I mean, it totally depends what's going on in my world. And I am an inbox zero person, which is harder and harder to do. And I am not there right now. But usually it is like, ironically, I do wake up in the morning and skim it. I look for anything like super important, but I try not to make that be the first set of tasks I do. And then I usually have an hour block in the middle and then end of day cleanup.
Cool. So if we were to add up all the time, I'm mostly just curious for my own self, because I also do inbox zero.
2.5. I don't know.
Yeah, that feels about right.
That's like a made up number, but obviously it totally depends. There are days when I'm like writing a super long novel to someone and trying to like answer something detailed or give feedback on a board deck. And there are days where like you're just ripping through quick ones. But yeah, I think that's probably about right.
Yeah, right on. And what are your goals at this stage of your career? Like we all have different milestones, right? And so I look at someone like you, you've had some badass milestones. Like from your first gig and working your way up and having a bigger impact to going to OpenView and becoming a partner, being a partner at stage 2. So I'm curious to know, like, what's the next goal or milestone that you might look forward to?
Oh, it's such a good question. I feel like I have them in slightly different veins, swim lanes. So like, I think the first one that comes to mind is helping my network and the people that have worked for me. Like I get a lot of personal joy and satisfaction about getting those calls of somebody looking for their next job, landing their next job, trying to figure out actually a lot of what we're talking about on this podcast or session, right? Like going through the motions of trying to find something that makes them really happy. And I love seeing people land those roles and getting those updates. Personally, like as I think about my own on the work front, I think, working through the later stages of a company partnership, I've made a bunch of investments. I love working with my portfolio companies, but getting to see a lot of them come to like scale and fruition and the late stages of an investment journey is something that I have not really experienced. And I'm like very excited to see what's coming. And then the last one I think is this, non-software piece, which is thinking about what are the non-correlated things in my life that I think are really important and, have toyed with various things over time. But hey, what's like, sounds weird to say like the retirement plan because I don't really mean that, but like, hey, you're probably not going to work in software forever. What are other things that get you excited? And, my husband and I have toyed with opening a donut shop or like a coffee shop in a small town. And so these are things that are like, out there on the radar and like the one day pile.
I love that. I love the idea of a coffee shop. I will be a customer. I actually told a mentor of mine I wanted to open a coffee shop and he squashed my dream like a bug on the ground. And so I dream about the same thing.
Yeah, I love that.
I feel like if there's like a correlation between number of years you've worked in tech and how much you dream about having some like small bistro type business.
A physical product you can control. That's what it really comes down to for me.
Yeah. That's great. Thank you for coming on and sharing your story and your journey. For those who are listening that want to follow you, where can they get more?
A couple of spots on LinkedIn. Come find me. And then I write a blog every week called Dear Stage 2 on Substack and try to put out tactical advice once a week, answering questions that come in. It is like your classic Dear Abby advice column, but for go-to-market and software.
We'll put a link to it in the comments. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the pod. I hope that you enjoyed the episode. If you did, the biggest gift that you could give me as a small business owner and as a content creator would be a review. You know the game. You can go on to Apple Podcasts. You can go on Spotify. Leave a review. That would help me service this content to other folks who are like you. Obviously, you should subscribe to the content if you really dug it. And if there's feedback that you have for me, folks you think I should chat with, stuff that you wish I would gloss over faster, whatever it is, I'm all ears. I work in growth. You're not going to hurt my feelings. I try to collect feedback and iterate quickly. can reach out to me on LinkedIn at Andrew Kaplan or on Twitter at @akaplan. Otherwise, hope you enjoyed the episode, and I'll see you next show.